Tomorrow we can all start dating our checks January the 2nd, 1993, which we will probably do for a few days until we finally get the habit straightened out. Banks, generally speaking, are very understanding of that this time of year. It's also the time everybody makes New Year's resolutions, and you can relax. I am not going to give a sermon today about New Year's resolutions. It's also a time for the review of the past year. All the television programs have what happened over the past year. You can relax. I'm not going to bore you with recounting all the news that you have already seen, the things that happened last year. It, however, is also a time for predictions for the new year, and I find that much more interesting. What is going to happen in the course of 1994? That's also considerably more difficult. It's easier to tell you what happened in 1993 than to tell you what's going to happen in 1994. The news media are full of people making their predictions for 1994. I will tell you today what I think about some of their predictions, and I may even make a few modest predictions of my own in the process. I want to address three important areas that have been discussed at some great length over the past year and will be discussed ad nauseum in the coming months and the early weeks of this year, of things that are going to be happening and where people are making predictions about what's to take place. They are the economy, health care, and welfare reform. Now, before I address these things, if you wonder why it is that we, and by that I mean those of us in the ministry of the Church of God International, Mr. Ted Armstrong foremost among us, and myself and others included, if you wonder why we criticize government, it is because it is our job. Something that has, I think, gotten away from us a little bit with the passage of time, that those of us who are old-time members of the church, our membership going back some 30 years and more, will remember very vividly. Herbert W. Armstrong used to remind us over and over and over again, hopefully so that we would never forget it, that Jesus Christ came with a message. His message was the gospel of the kingdom of God. We don't have that many kingdoms around the world today, although there are a few, but a kingdom it requires territory, and it requires subjects, and it requires a king. And a synonym for kingdom is government. And that Jesus Christ came bringing a message of government. And that one of the great lessons of history is that mankind, having rejected God's government in favor of his own, has successively, repeatedly, again and again, botched every attempt at government that he has tried. Now, we are fond of saying that of all the governments on the face of this earth, the ones that I would most like to live under are the democratic governments like here in the United States or in Great Britain. The fact of the matter is, though, as we look around the world, man has failed spectacularly at government. Everywhere. We have seen the last few years one of the most dramatic examples of man's failure that you have ever seen. It was built on really an idealistic approach to government, that we would basically take from the whole group of us would work hard and produce things for the whole, and then each of us would take from that as we had need, and the government would control all the means of production, and it wouldn't be greedy capitalists taking advantage of the masses, that the masses would form the government, and the government would be, everything would be owned by the masses, and that therefore we would share equally in all things. Marxism, communism, socialism, whatever it is you want to call it, has been one of the most spectacular failures of government and governmental systems and economic systems in the history of mankind. It was an irony for me because for the first time I was studying Marx just as Marxism was failing. I had gotten a set of tapes about Marx, his teachings, what he had said, his ideas, and was listening my way through them just as the Berlin Wall was coming down, just as the Soviet Union was coming unglued. And it was so spectacular to see all this happen, and then to hear at the same time this man making these pronouncements which had been believed, followed, and accepted by millions of people. Now his very pronouncements all being proved absolutely, clearly, and categorically wrong. We had a habit when Russia or Soviet Union was coming apart of saying, well, the Cold War is over, and we won it. Actually, we did not win the Cold War. We simply outlasted the Soviets. We have lasted longer. And yet, if you sit around watching the news programs, you can see them, different kinds of commentary programs where they get some of the best minds in the country. They get them together, they ask questions, they argue, they discuss public policy. You'll be led to believe that we have very serious problems in this country. Only the three of them I'm talking about today are the economy and health care and welfare reform. These are enormous problems that threaten to bring our whole economy down in ruins. And we seem to go on thinking that we're the winners in all these things that have gone on in the world. Well, the Soviet Union crashed. In fact, I remember even as a boy doing some early studies of history in school, and they were talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. And I remember a teacher saying that every major system, government that had ever existed in the world had failed. And even as a boy, I wondered to myself, well, I wonder then when, I didn't say if, I wonder then when the American system will fail. Why is Christ returning? What's he coming back for? I mean, we all know that he is. We read in the Bible, he said, if I go, I will come again. Why is he coming back? Is it just to rescue us? He doesn't need to come back for that. In fact, most churches across the land tomorrow morning will believe in a God or a Christ who, when you die, takes you immediately to heaven at the time, so that at the end of time, all of his people are there. He has no need to come here for them, not for them. Now, we have long understood that Jesus Christ is coming back to the earth to smash human government and to set up his own government. So don't bridle when those of us who have to preach about Christ, about his message, about the kingdom of God, tell you why it is that he must return. Don't bridle when we point out to you the corruption of human government. Don't blanch when we tell you that our government will not work and cannot work. Don't bridle at the thing when we tell you how much corruption there is in it and how every system that man puts up is loaded with faults and that the solution to the problem will simply be the cause of the next problem. It's our duty to tell you that because it's our duty to cause you to look for God's kingdom. So that whenever you pray, you will pray. One of the first things you'll say, Our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come. I prefer your government over this one or any other that man will come up with. All the prophets criticized government. All of them. Take your concordance and look through the prophets for the word princes and prophets and priests. And read what the prophets had to say about the false preachers and about the priests and about the princes and the kings of Israel and where they had led the people. Read about the things that they criticized. It's all there. Jesus criticized the government of his day. Did you realize that? Oh, I'm not talking about the Roman government. The Roman occupying forces were there because the government of Israel had failed. It was a part of their punishment. That's why the Romans were in there in the first place. And it's why the Romans came through and utterly destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. It's because of the government of Israel. Jesus looked around at the men who were sitting in the seats of Jewish government at the time and called them snakes in the grass, vipers, and hypocrites. He had nothing whatsoever good to say about these men. Why did he do that? Because they were to be blamed. And so, as it was his job, and as it was the job of the prophets, so it is our job. Now I'll pause. Now, having said all that, I'll go to the three areas that I wanted to tell you that I would make my comments and my predictions about, if you will, for 1994. First is the economy. I heard some people saying on television the other night, the economy will remain strong through 1994. I think that's probably true. The thing that worries us in this country, though, is not the day-to-day ongoing nature of our economy. What worries us is the fact that we know that somewhere, either this year or next year or the year after, the effect of the mounting deficits, the effect of the mounting debt in this country, sooner or later the piper is going to have to be paid, And I guess we're all sitting here hoping that we will be dead before then. It's the only thing that makes any sense. We don't wish to pay for it, and on we go, spending as we do. The economy is brittle. My modest prediction, and it sure seems safe when you think about it, the government will lose ground on deficit reform in 1994. Isn't that, doesn't that surprise you? The government will lose ground. The reason is because they will not address the cause, number one. And number two, the people of this country don't want it. Now, you think they do. They may talk a lot about it, but the truth is the people of this country do not want it. How do I know that? Well, there was this fellow who was overheard. I don't know if this is an apocryphal story, if it really happened. But the story is told of a man who was overheard when he heard about the big savings and loan crisis and how the government was going to have to bail it all out, said, in the hearing of friends, well, I don't see why, that we, or mentioned that the taxpayers were going to have to bail out the savings and loans. He said, I don't understand why we have to do it. Let the government do it. Now, we all know better than that, and yet somehow there is this feeling, somehow there is a mindset in our country that it's not us that does it, it's not us that pays for it, it is the government that pays for it. Now, how do we get to that? Well, it's not that hard to figure out, really. The government goes out and passes, there's a bill went through Congress a couple of years ago to give hurricane relief because of Hurricane Andrew that went through Florida, and to extend unemployment benefits for another so many weeks. And the total amount of that, I think, was I think it was $1 billion. It was $500 million for hurricane relief and $500 million for unemployment relief. Now, they did that. Do you know how they paid for that? Do you realize now, for example, they could have passed that, and they could have put a surtax, which you and I would have, come the end of the year, we'd have filled out our tax forms, the surtax would have been on it, and we would have hardly known the difference. But they didn't. There was no tax. They did not cut another government program to pay for it. They made no provision whatsoever to pay for it. Because in this country, there is a disconnect between taxes and spending. You spend over here, you tax over here, and what doesn't match in between, you borrow. And the government can just borrow and borrow and borrow, and unlike you, they never have to pay. Now, you may think, oh yeah, the government has to pay someday. No, the government doesn't have to pay someday. The truth is, the government can start the printing presses tomorrow morning and print enough currency to pay off all the national debt, and they have it all cleared up by tomorrow night. Or Congress can pass a law on Monday that just simply eradicates the national debt. All the people the government owes money to, they will never pay it. It's gone. They can do that. They have the power to do that. Now, it'd be hard to get reelected after that. You might find yourself being assassinated by some of the people who hold all the paper on all that money. A lot of problems could come, and you probably would have an awful time ever borrowing any money again as a government, which isn't all that bad. But nevertheless, it could be done. The government does not have to pay it back, they think. But I want you to understand this. There is in all of us, and in this country at large, it has become really a way of thought and a way of life, that there are a lot of things that we want. And we want these things, but we want someone else to pay for them. Now, that someone else, for example, in the case of the health care plan, could be smokers. I'm very willing to vote for an increase in taxes on cigarettes to pay for my health care. I'd like to have more money spent on my health care. And I don't want to have to pay for it. I don't smoke. Let's let the smokers all pay for it. So that's one way we can go about doing it. Smokers are a little uncomfortable with that, but they're not much in a position to complain. The other one, and this one is a little more likely to be, is rich people. Let's let the rich people pay for it. Now, there's one thing I want you to understand about this particular thing. The idea is, well, let's pass a law that grants a benefit to all of us, and let's make this narrow little slice of the population called the rich pay for it. Okay? Actually, there are more of us than there are of them. What we really ought to do is just take everything they got, right? Why settle for just making them pay more taxes? But no, that wouldn't seem fair. Let's just take more taxes of the rich. Now, spare your pity for the rich. I don't feel sorry for the rich in this. In fact, The rich have gotten much richer in the last year through a rather thing that most people really do not understand at all. The rich people in this country, I mean, would you say that the people who hold government debt, U.S. government bonds, are wealthy people, well-to-do people? In other words, if they hold $1 million of U.S. government bonds, they're pretty well off. If they hold $50 million in U.S. government bonds, they're even better off, right? Do you realize that in the process of dropping interest rates like we have over the past year, as a result of the deficit reduction and the things which have thrown a few Americans out of work and some of the problems that have come along, that we have actually, all those people who own U.S. government bonds, the value of their bonds went up dramatically in the course of the past year, and they became even richer? Didn't you ever wonder why the rich were not moaning and groaning and falling down in the streets about the tax increase? Because the government was taking a little more money from them in tax increases, and they were gaining enormously in the value of their bonds because of declining interest rates. This is a law, you can call this Dart's Law of Economics if you wish, that anything the government does to change the economy, to help the economy, will help the rich more than it helps the poor. Anything the government does that hurts the economy will hurt the poor more than it hurts the rich. And that inevitably, as the government gets in and stirs the pot, they will make the rich richer, and they will make the poor poorer, and the situation will get worse. It will not get better. But of course, there is this other category of people. These are the ones that are really going to have to pay for all these things that we're doing now, because the rich, they're no big deal. They have, if you took everything they had, you couldn't make a dent in all the things we've got to pay for. You know who it is that's really going to pay? The next generation. Children not yet born. Now, as long as we in this country, and the government has done nothing to address the cause of this. I don't even know that the government, whatever the government is, sees the cause of it. But the fact of the matter is that as long as we in this country are willing to take and let someone else pay for it, we'll never solve the economic problems of this country. Save your pity for the poor. Because when you pass laws that give benefits to the majority of the people in our country and take the money for it from a minority or some other people or another generation, you are corrupting the people who get it. You're corrupting the poor. You're corrupting the middle class because you're perpetuating the myth that you can have something and make somebody else pay for it. There is absolutely no way to solve economic problems like that. There's a book in the Old Testament where a prophet sort of addresses this. It's back in the Minor Prophets. His name is Haggai. He may be a little hard to find, but if you page around, you should be able to find him. He is right after Zephaniah and right before Zechariah. And Zechariah is right before Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament. The prophet Haggai. I'm going to begin reading in chapter 1, verse 2. Thus speaketh Jehovah of hosts, saying, This people say, the time is not come that the Lord's house should be built. Now, let me just set the historical stage. They had returned to Palestine. They had come back into the land. God had intervened with the Persians. They had been released and allowed to come home. At least many of them had. And they had begun the work of planting crops and getting, the herds in the fields and rebuilding the wall and doing different things. The people have said, the time has not come that the Lord's house should be built. Now, I will also pause and tell you one more thing. The temple, which is what this is talking about, was really not very important to God. When the idea for building a temple was first put up, God said, I never wanted a temple. I never asked for it. It never came into my mind. I have lived in tents all this time. But David wanted the temple built, so God allowed Solomon, his son, to build the temple. So keep that in mind, that the house is not what's important to God. These people say, the time has not come that the Lord's house should be built. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O you, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? In other words, you've come home, you've built your own home. You haven't just put up a little framework and moved into it and left the inside to be finished off later. You have finished it. You live in a nice house, a fine home. Sealed, meaning the inside of it has all been taken care of. It's not rough. Is it time for you to live in your sealed houses, and this house, that's my house, lie waste? It's an interesting little comparison. We've come back to the land. We've built, here's the temple lying in ruins, the very symbol of God in our society. So we just leave it lying there, and we build our house. We don't merely get shelter over our heads. We get it like we want it, and we keep right on doing it. We say to ourselves, well, it's not time for God's house to be built. Now, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Let's consider the result of this. You have sown much, and you bring in little. You eat, but you don't have enough. You drink, but you're not filled with drink. You clothe you, but nobody gets warm. And you earn wages. He that earns wages to put it into a bag with holes. How was their economy working, folks? Were they able to really get ahead? Their crops weren't coming in. They were earning wages, but it was as though they put the wages into a bag with holes. If I've ever read a description of the way it is living in our world, here it is. The economy isn't working. What he is saying is you've come back and you've seen to your own affairs and you have absolutely ignored the very symbol of God in your community and your society. And your economy is in a shambles. I wonder why. Could there be some connection between these? Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountain and bring wood and build the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith the Lord. You looked for much, and it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew upon it. Why, saith the Lord of hosts? Because of my house that lies waste, and every one of you runs to his own house. Now, I think, again, the temple is merely symbolic in this whole thing. But if you look at our society today, God is only in our public discourse as a point of argumentation over whether or not our children are allowed to pray in schools. A principal who allowed a child to pray over a public address system in school loses his job. People are going to court constantly fighting, and the courts are consistently making decisions to keep God out of public discourse, God out of our life in every way. Colleges and universities can only teach religion as an abstract subject, and it has to be taught in such a way that students, by and large, if they take it having faith, will have lost their faith by the time they leave the class. It was interesting when I was teaching at the University of Texas many years ago. I was teaching communications and having kids give speeches. And it was stunning to me occasionally that when they had their own choice of topics, but it seemed like about every other week some student was getting up and in the course of giving his speech was letting us all know that the university was slowly and systematically destroying his faith. Now, it's one thing to say that a state-supported university should not be out there building the faith of people. But should it be destroying the faith? Is it necessary for a university to wipe out the faith of Christian young people, people who believe in God, who come to the university? The economy will not be addressed. The problems of our economy will not be solved for one simple reason. No one will recognize that the underlying cause is we are no longer being blessed by God because we have effectively barred God from public discourse in this country. Health care. If we get a health care bill in 1994, it will fail. Now, failure, of course, is a relative term, I suppose. We thought that we were going to solve a lot of problems with Medicare and with Medicaid, and we solved the problems for a lot of individuals in this country. There are people who are being taken care of now who seemingly might not have been taken care of or would have had to be taken care of another way had we not passed Medicare and Medicaid. But the cost of these programs just keep on going up. And nobody seems, I have heard some aspects of the cause of this addressed. One of the simplest things, and it should be easy for anyone to understand, is that you have two individuals contracting for a service that a third party who is not present is going to pay for. Isn't that simple? Larry Watkins and I are going to sit down and we're going to agree to spend some money that you, who aren't in this meeting, are going to pay for. Larry's the doctor, I'm the patient, you're the insurance company. That's the way it goes, folks. The truth is that probably, I don't know how many of you have insurance here and how long you have had it, but there's probably been a time in the course of your going to and from your doctor when you and your doctor have connived, maybe too strong a word, together, to be sure that you were diagnosed in such a way that your insurance company would pay for something that if you didn't have the insurance, you would not do, and probably would live as long a life and as comfortable a life without it as if you had not been diagnosed. It happens all the time. It happens in innocent ways. It happens in devious ways. It happens in criminal ways. That's one of our problems. Do you think that that will be effectively addressed? How are you going to address it? Well, the idea is that we'll make the government the third party in this transaction, so that Mr. Watkins and I then can negotiate between ourselves and agree on what we're going to do here and make the government pay for it. Has that solved anything? No, except for one thing. The government can then come and put both of us in jail so that we can't pay any taxes anymore, and we can put a stop to what we're doing, but then somebody else will be doing it. There's something else at work in this health care thing. There's something else that is seriously wrong in all of this that nobody has even begun to address. I'll address it for you. Turn back to Exodus chapter 15. Exodus chapter 15. I made my prediction. We may get a health care bill. It's not going to solve the problem. The reason is because it will not address this situation. Exodus chapter 15, and I'll begin reading in verse 23. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah, which means bitter. That's why we call it bitter. Bitter springs. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, well, what are we going to drink? And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. And there he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. And he said, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon you, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that heals you. Oh, really? In other words, if we don't really listen to God, if we don't, as a people, do what is right in God's sight, if we will not really give ear to his commandments and his statutes, then he will put the diseases upon us which he put upon the Egyptians. My goodness. What a surprise. What a new wrinkle on all this. The reason, then, why there is so much sickness and disease among us as a people, could it be because we have not done what's right in God's sight? Could it possibly be that we have not kept God's commandments and his statutes? Oh, yeah, it could. Yes, it could. And in fact, among all those people who are responsible for this, right at the head of the class stand the preachers. Those preachers who a long time ago began to say, oh, it doesn't really matter whether you keep the law or not, Christ kept it for you. And yet you are forgiven not merely of your sins, you are forgiven in your sins. Preachers who tell their congregation that the law of God was abolished, that it was done away, that the commandments, the statutes, and the judgment were all swept aside by the death of Jesus Christ. Whereas in truth, the only thing that was swept aside by the death of Jesus Christ was the penalty for having broken those laws and the sins, not the laws. Jesus, the idea that Jesus would come along to do away with a law that said, you shall honor your father and your mother, is absurd on the face of it. To argue that the law that says thou shalt do no murder was done away with is to say that it's no longer a sin to commit murder. If the law was abolished, at least that seems to me to be elementary logic. And yet the preachers have stood right up and told congregations that and argued that. Some of you may have encountered that argument from time to time. Later in Deuteronomy, the 7th chapter, and I'll begin in verse 12. Once again, why are we sick? What does it take to get well? What does it take to solve the health care crisis? Verse 12 of chapter 7. It shall come to pass that if you will listen to these judgments and keep and do them, that the Lord your God shall keep unto you the covenant and the mercy which he swore to your fathers. He will love you. He will bless you. He will multiply you. He will bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, your corn, your wine, your oil, the increase of your cattle, the flocks of your sheep in the land which He swore to your fathers to give you. You shall be blessed above all people. There will not be male or female barren among you or all your cattle. The Lord will take away from you all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt which you know upon you, but will lay them upon all those that hate you. And you shall consume all the people which the Lord your God shall deliver to you. You shall have no pity on them. You shall not serve their gods, for that will be a snare to you. Now, the one thing that is absolutely inescapable is there is a direct, hard connection between sin and sickness. Between keeping the law of God and health. To some extent, it may require an intervention on God's part. To some extent, it may require a blessing where God makes a pronouncement and then carries forth to see to it that we are healthy. But in a very, very large measure, the obedience to the law of God brings health without intervention. That the violation of the law of God brings sickness and disease without divine intervention. It is simply a right way to live. You go down first of the year and buy yourself a brand new automobile. The automobile will be delivered to you with an instruction book. And it will tell you, if you want to operate this piece of machinery for 150, 200,000 miles, you want to have really trouble-free service with it, you really want it to work, here are the things you should do to take care of your car. And if you step in and you really do systematically take care of those things, it makes a real difference in the way things pan out for you in the course of driving this car over time. The old saying that people used to shake their heads and say, boy, they sure don't make them like they used to. And the truth is, they don't make them like they used to, and you ought to be thankful for it. Because by the time you got one of those old cars up to 75 or 80 or 90,000 miles, it was falling apart. A lot of these new cars will run 200,000 miles and still not using all that much oil if they are taken care of. All right? Here's man. Here's man. Where is the instruction book? You know what kind of oil you're supposed to put in your car. You know what weight of oil, what types of oil, what type of viscosity that particular piece of machinery ought to have. You know what you're supposed to do about lubrication. You know what you're supposed to do about break-in periods. You know what you're supposed to do about changing belts and hoses. You know all these things, because they're all in the book about your car, how to take care of it. And some of your dealers will actually send you a little card and say, it's time to do this, it's time to do that. And all you got to do is just follow along with it. Where's the instruction book for man? Now, there seems to be in many people's minds this crazy idea that things just work. And it really doesn't matter so much how you take care of this body. It doesn't really matter so much whether you obey God's law. It just, some people are healthy and some people are not, and there's nothing you can do about it. Some people are sick and some people are not, and there's nothing you can do about it. And there's no cause or effect relationship. We don't want to think about those things because it would make us responsible. But here it is. There's your instruction book. It is a little longer than the one you got with your car, but you last longer than the car. And the stakes are higher than they are with your car. Because you're dealing now not merely with living long on the land. You're dealing with the possibility of living forever. And if you're going to live forever, you do want things to work and last. Well, there is a way for these things to work. But somehow we charge off to living our lives without any regard to it, and then we wonder why it is that things don't work. And here we live in a nation which has worked better than most nations do. But we're beginning to worry. We are really beginning to worry about our nation because things are not working like they ought to. And they're not working like they used to. And there are little cracks beginning to show here and there, and the possibility that there would not be an America like we have grown to know and love in another 10 years or 15 years or 20 years is beginning to become a reality we have to consider. That the loss of freedom because of the crime that begins to be, so rampant in our streets. The thing that worries me most about crime is not nearly so much the fact that I will be victimized by it as it is that all of us will lose our freedom because of it. That's the big worry. You do understand, don't you, that it was because the German economy and society was in danger of falling apart that the German people were willing to give up their freedoms to Adolf Hitler? You do understand that, don't you? This thing now of trying to take control of guns, and I have no argument with gun control. I have no particular argument about licensing guns. I couldn't care less about 5-day waiting periods. All I want to tell you is this one thing about it. It is a manifestation of the fact that we fear we are losing control of our society. It's not the guns that we fear. It's the people who carry them. It's what people are doing with them. But the fact is, we are now willing to give up this small freedom, and then that small freedom, and then another small freedom to try to solve the problems that are coming down around our ears. And we will give up one freedom after another because we have forgotten God. And we don't trust God. And we do not draw God into the public discourse. We do not inquire how would God's Word tell us to solve this problem. You cannot bring God onto the public scene. It's forbidden. You can talk about God in church, and you can buy time on the air now to talk about God. But as time goes by, even that may become more and more difficult as one freedom after another is eroded. 1984 will almost certainly see further small erosions of freedom in this country. It's just like a little blood vessel breaks here, and a little blood vessel breaks over here, and another one breaks over there. And sooner or later, the body politic won't function anymore. They say they're going to try welfare reform in 1994. I am willing to predict, I think, that nothing will be done to reduce the cost of welfare in 1994. It's tempting to say nothing will be done, period. But I don't know that I can say that. I think, though, to say that nothing will be done to reduce the cost, I feel fairly safe, because everything I have heard recently about welfare reform involves spending money to make the situation better. And the whole idea that most of you think about when you think about welfare reform is reducing the cost of welfare reform, right? To make it more efficient. But I don't think that that will happen in the coming year. The reason, and here's the reason why it will not be. To deal effectively with welfare reform in this country requires that moral judgments be made. Moral judgments must be made. That it is wrong to bring a child into the world without a father. There's a voice here and there saying now, and voices that, 10 years ago would not have said this, are now saying it's wrong to bring a child into the world without a father. As long as the individuals who are saying this as individuals, they can probably continue to say it for a long time. But at what point in time do you think that the president, as president, will do something along those lines? At what point in time will Congress pass a law that represents a moral judgment having to do with unwed mothers and with illegitimate children in this country? Do any of you believe they're going to do that in 1994? I don't think so, because I do not believe that we in this country are in a position to make moral judgments. In fact, it's in the nature of things. Human government is not positioned to make moral judgments. You know, all this stuff happened a long, long time ago. Samuel was a judge over Israel. And the people were kind of worried because Samuel's his sons weren't really behaving like Samuel. And so they came to Samuel and said, we want God to give us a king to rule over us like all the nations around us. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried to God all night long and fasted. He thought it was a terrible thing that they were asking for, because he had at least some vision of where it would go. And God came to Samuel in a vision, and he said, Samuel, he says, listen to the people, because they have not rejected you. They have rejected me, that I would not reign over them. The whole question is a question of government. Are we willing to be ruled by God or not? We made a decision a long time ago that we in this country would not be ruled by God. Israel made the decision when Samuel went ahead and made Saul king over them. And God told them what would happen. He told them that the things that would happen under Saul were exactly the same sort of things that will happen to us today. That all of a sudden your government is going to absorb an enormous amount of your economy, and it's going to cost you in ways that you never imagined. Not only will it cost you in money, it will cost you your sons and your daughters, because he'll take your daughters in to be pastry cooks in his palace, and your sons he'll take into his army. Your world is going to be very, very different because you have decided you wanted a human king instead of having me to be your king. I know it sounds like an oversimplification, but we are in trouble in our government because we have driven God from the public arena. That's the reason. And we also seem, and this is critical, to have effectively barred the way for his readmission to rational discussion. How is he going to get back into it? How are you going to bring it back into it? How in the world are you going to walk on the floor of Congress and really seriously discuss some of the questions that need to be discussed to make the moral judgments and the moral decisions that have to be made in that Congress? Be it Democrat, Republican, or Independent, I don't even care. Those political parties now are becoming mostly irrelevant because the nation has lost its will and its direction, because it no longer wants God in the picture. The people will not stand for it. You may not think that, but you will come to see that I am right. We have gotten the government that we, the people, deserve. Where will it all lead? Well, another aspect of the reasoning behind this, which also gives you a clue about where it's going to go, is found back in the book of Deuteronomy. It's the 28th chapter, and it's a long chapter, and time will not permit me to read it all, and I don't want to bore you just by standing here reading the passage of Scripture to you. But I do want to call your attention to some areas of it because they are so critical. Deuteronomy 28. It shall come to pass that if you shall hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments which I command you this day, that the Lord your God will set you on high above all nations of the earth, and these blessings will come upon you and overtake you, if you will hearken to the voice of the Lord your God. Okay, what was the direction that things were supposed to go? Well, they were to be set on high above all the nations of the earth, and blessings on top of blessings were to be poured out upon them, to where this problem of welfare reform, health care reform, the economy, balancing the budget would not have been a problem for them at all. None of these things would have been. He said, if you will listen to the voice of the Lord your God, that's all there is to it. Listen to the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, and the fruit of the ground, and the fruit of the cattle, and the increase of your kind, the flocks of your sheep. Blessed will be your basket and your store. You'll be blessed when you come in. You'll be blessed when you go out. The Lord your God shall cause your enemies that rise up against you to be smitten before your face. They'll come out against you one way. They'll flee before you 7 ways. The Lord shall command the blessing upon you in your storehouses, in all that you set your hand unto. He shall bless you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You know, not perfectly, but this description is really not bad as applied to the United States of America in years gone by. I can remember a time when we had so much food in this country, we were trying to figure out ways to get rid of it. You know, we needed places to export it. We needed to be able to send it around the world. When the president makes a decision not to send wheat to Soviet Russia, it poses an enormous storage problem and great losses for our farmers because they got all this wheat they're growing, they can't do anything with it. We were just blessed and blessed and blessed. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, as he has sworn to you. But there's an if. If you will keep his commandments. If you'll keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his way. All the people of the earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will be afraid of you. The Lord will make you plenteous in goods, and the fruit of your body, the fruit of your cattle, the fruit of the ground, the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. And he goes on with all these blessings that he's given him. Then, though, in verse 15 is the other side of the coin. It shall come to pass, if you will not listen to the voice of the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall you be in the city. And that's all you got to, watch television for a little while tonight or tomorrow, and somebody's going to start talking about the problem of the code word now is the inner city. Places where it is not even safe for you to go anymore. We are cursed in the city. Cursed shall you be in the field. Cursed shall be your basket and your store. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body with birth defects. And of course, the thing that I never would have expected, I remember during the last presidential campaign, I went down to Harvey Hall because George Bush was coming through, and I was standing there waiting for him to appear, and I turned around and looked toward the back wall, and there was a banner across the wall, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never realized it before. 22 million babies had been aborted since Roe versus Wade had been decided, up until the day that the President Bush came to Tyler in that election. 22 million. I never really imagined that the curse upon the womb, upon the fruit of the body, would be because their own mothers were killing them. It's really something. The fruit of your land, the increase of your cattle, the flocks of your sheep. Cursed shall you be when you come in. Cursed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will send upon you cursing, vexation, and rebuke, and all that you set your hand for to do, until you be destroyed and until you perish quickly, because of the wickedness of your doings, whereby you have forsaken me. It's all a matter of degree, I suppose. But things have changed in this country. Public discourse has changed in this country. God is being frozen out of the picture, and any way whereby God might be reintroduced is being slowly but surely and legally, systematically blocked, so that the way back is no longer there. The Lord will make the pestilence cleave to you until he has consumed you from off the land where you're going to possess it. He continues with these. He says in verse 28, the Lord will smite you with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart, growing and increasing insanity. I don't really know anything about the statistics of that, but I do know one thing, that we are in touch with it more than we used to be, because you stumble over them on the gratings on your way to the bank. The homeless people, most of those people out there are in the category of mad and blind, and they're stonied in heart. That is, they're sick people. They're out of their minds. They're crazy. And they were booted out of mental institutions because they could theoretically function in societies at large. You will grope at the noonday as the blind gropes in darkness, and you shall not prosper in your ways. You shall only be oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save you. You'll betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. And of course, that seems to be talking about warfare. We're managing that without warfare or anything of the sort nowadays. As far as betrothals and who's sleeping with who, marriage seems to have little to do with it anymore. Your sons and your daughters, verse 32, shall be given to other people. Your eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in your hand. Again, in the past, I always looked at this and imagined it as captivity and your sons and your daughters being taken away. And now, we're in a situation where children are stolen, given to other people. And your eyes look and fail with longing for them all the day long. And you see pictures of children on milk cartons and fence posts and telephone poles around the country. Have you seen this child? Children who are being kidnapped and sold and given away to other people. And who knows what else is happening to them. This didn't happen. This did not happen, folks, when I was a kid. When I was growing up and going to school, I could be sent on a mile or a 2-mile walk to school, and nobody worried. The neighbors kept, looking to see that I didn't dally too much along the way, poking some frog or toad with a stick or this kind of thing. The neighbors would look out and see you fiddling, and they'd go on and send you on to school in the morning and send you on home in the evening. But nobody worried. I don't remember any kids being kidnapped. I don't remember this being an epidemic in our country. There weren't children's pictures on milk cartons or on fence posts. Not in those days. This has changed. The fruit of your land, the fruit of your labors, a nation that you don't know shall eat up, and you shall only be oppressed and cursed always, so that you shall be mad for the sight of your eyes, which you shall see. The Lord your God, verse 36, shall bring you and your king, which you have set over you, to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and you'll serve other gods of wood and stone. In our case, we didn't have to be carried away somewhere else to serve gods of wood and stone. We've managed to do that right here. Verse 47. Because you serve not the Lord your God with joyfulness, with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things, therefore shall you serve your enemies, which the Lord your God shall send against you, in hunger, in thirst, nakedness, and want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck. How bad can it get? Well, the passage of Scripture that we're reading here gets worse and worse. And it basically says in the simplest and possible terms, all this stuff is going to happen to you because you wouldn't listen to me, because you wouldn't keep my commandments, because you wouldn't obey my laws, because you wouldn't hear anything about my ethics and my morals and the way a person is supposed to live his life. You decided that you knew how, that you could decide for yourself how to manage your own affairs without any help from me. You could govern yourself quite well alone, thank you very much. And this is where it's going to take you. Now, you think that in the course of 1994 we're going to solve our economic problems? You think we're going to really sort out our health care difficulties? We're really going to reform welfare? Which of you are willing to desert and do nothing for all these little babies that are being born with no fathers in our town, Dallas and Fort Worth and Chicago and New York? You're willing to just walk off and leave them, let them starve to death, right? That'll solve our welfare problem. No, it won't. And none of you are willing to do it. We in this country haven't come to that place yet. And so we will continue to follow along patterns and courses which will sap our economic strength because we are not prepared to make the moral judgments necessary to change the pattern of behavior of people in this country. We're not willing to step into the schools and tell them they can't teach things the way they have taught them before. We're not willing to step into schools and say, oh no, you will allow prayer. There will be prayer. Not only will there be prayer, but the Ten Commandments will be taught here. Do you think we're going to do that? Do you think we can solve the problems? Unless we start in school, in teaching moral values. The big question is whose? Everybody wants to ask. You know why they ask that question? Because they've forgotten about the one that wrote this book. They've forgotten about God. I don't have any question if they say, well, you're talking about whose God are we going to pray to? And whose morals and whose values are we going to teach? I've got an answer. The God of the Bible. The God of Abraham. The God of Isaac. The God of Jacob. That's the answer. How soon do you think in this country that answer will be accepted? In Romans chapter 1, Paul took a look around him at the world and considered some of these things. And he said in verse 18 of Romans 1, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest to them, because God has shown it to them. What he is saying categorically is that they know better. Then why is it, since we know better, that we can't do better? You know, if you challenge any member of Congress, you walk up to the guy on the street and say, do you believe in God? He says, well, of course I believe in God. What God? He'd tell you, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He'd tell you maybe in some word, but he might say, well, I'm a Christian, I believe in Christ. I'm a Jew, I believe in the God of Abraham. You walk up to the president, he'll tell you the same thing. The first lady will tell you the same thing. Many of the members of his staff will tell you the same thing. What percentage of Congress do you suppose go to church somewhere? Do they not know? Do they not know that there is a God in heaven? Do they not know that God has a way to live? Do they not know that there's a difference between right and wrong? If they know it, why, folks, pray tell, can we not do something about it? Well, it's an interesting question. But there's not a one of you that really believes in the course of 1994 that anything will be done about it. Because we have frozen God out. And the problem is that even though individually we may believe, individually we may be able to face certain questions, collectively we don't seem to be able to do it. We just can't step up to the responsibilities that we have. He said, the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. They can go around and pass out condoms in schools to their heart's content. But the time is going to come, next month or next year or the year after, when everyone is going to look at that. I don't mean just a few people who do right now look at it and say it's foolish. The time will come when everyone looks at it and everyone will know it was stupid. But they could know it now, if they would. He said, when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness, through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Which Huxley was it that made the statement that one of the reasons why he so pressed and was so enamored of Darwin and pushed so hard for Darwin's theories was because of their sexual desires? They basically wanted to be freed from the shackles and the restraints of God. And so man found a way to get free of it. And this that he describes here is the result. For this cause, verse 26, God gave them up to vile affections. Even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. Likewise, the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, men with men working what is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of their error, which was fitting. And as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, putting it rather mildly. You know, if you go long enough without allowing God into your knowledge, without allowing God into your mind, without allowing God into your heart, sooner or later God will give you up to a reprobate mind. And the result is they are filled with unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers. Sounds like the evening news. Sounds like what I hear on television all the time. We are a nation driven by covetousness. We are a nation driven by envy, driven by murder. If you don't think we're driven by envy, look at the politicians who are using envy as the means of getting votes. If it didn't work, they wouldn't do it. We're driven by it. We are backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding. And some of this stuff about the way teenagers are presented on television, I think it is a reflection of the way things are in much of life. Disobedient to parents. Parents are not respected. They're not respected at school. The school doesn't care what parents want their children taught. Without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they that commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but take pleasure in them that do them. Is there any hope? Yeah. There's a lot of hope for us as individuals. There is repentance for us as individuals. There is a lot of room for us to turn our own personal life around. There is room to take knowledge of God. There is room to have God bless your life. There is room to have God enable you to walk between the raindrops, as it were, in this violent society. For us as individuals, there is a lot of hope. It is involved with repentance, of being sorry for the things that you have done that are wrong, of looking to God as the guide for your life, as the definition between right and wrong, and choosing to do the right rather than choosing to do the wrong. As individuals, it can turn your life around in ways that you never could imagine. As a people, as a nation, the room in which that kind of a change could be made is closing out. What would it take to cause us as a people, as a nation, to really begin to be cognizant of God from the beginning of our year to the end of our year in all of our legislation, in our schools, our educational system, our Congress, and in the White House, in public policy? What would it take? I don't believe, in my own experience, people generally repent. People turn back to God when their life is not working. When their life is working, when they're prosperous, when everything is clicking, they just don't make those changes. People turn to God when they need God. And the only way I can see that this nation would ever begin to make that kind of turn would ever begin to make that kind of move, well, it's like those people who, when a terrible catastrophe strikes their life, go to a private place and get on their knees and cry out to God, sometimes for the first time in years, and say, Lord, why me? Lord, what can I do? Lord, what do you want me to do now? I really don't believe that there's anything short of a terrible national catastrophe that could cause us as a whole people to turn back to God. But the prophets come along, those prophets who criticize government, those prophets who take the hide off kings for their immorality, those prophets who come along and tell what God's way is and where people are not doing it, tell us also that God will finally chastise us as a people, that He will finally bring us to our knees, that He will send us into captivity, not to destroy us, and not that we would be lost, but that we, as a people, might be saved. We can hope for that day, and we can look forward to the return of Christ, who will finally put down the governments of man and will bring justice and equity and fairness and morality to government finally. Our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come.